The morning light filtered through the classroom windows as children shuffled to their desks, backpacks thumping against chairs, voices chattering about weekend adventures and playground plans. But in the back corner of room 207, one small figure stood perfectly still beside her desk, hands clasped in front of her, eyes fixed on the floor. Emily Harrison, 6 years old with auburn hair, tied in careful braids, hadn't sat down in 3 days. Mrs. Carter noticed. She always noticed. What started as a curious observation had become something else entirely, something that made Mrs. Carter's stomach twist with an instinct she couldn't name yet. The veteran second-grade teacher had seen plenty of behavioral quirks in her 22 years at Riverside Elementary, plenty of children acting out or withdrawing for reasons both simple and complex. But this was different. This felt wrong in a way that kept her awake at night, replaying moments in her mind, searching for clues she might have missed. And when she finally discovered what Emily had been hiding beneath her school uniform, when she saw what no child should ever have to endure, her hands shook so violently she could barely dial 911. The operator's voice seemed distant as Mrs. Carter whispered the words that would change everything, words that would expose a horror happening in plain sight, while an entire school remained oblivious to a little girl's silent suffering. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy educational stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. The story begins 3 weeks earlier, when autumn had just begun painting the trees around Riverside Elementary in shades of amber and rust. The school sat on the edge of a quiet town in rural Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where teachers attended the same church as their students' families, where trust was assumed rather than earned. It was a small brick building with 12 classrooms, a gym that doubled as an auditorium, and a playground with equipment that had seen better days but still brought squeals of joy during recess. Mrs. Carter had taught in room 207 for the past decade, watching generations of families pass through her classroom, second graders becoming high schoolers, becoming parents themselves. Rachel Carter was 53 years old, a woman whose gentle demeanor belied the fierce protectiveness she felt for her students. She wore cardigans even in warm weather, kept a jar of peppermints on her desk for children who needed a small comfort, and had a talent for reading the emotional weather of 7-year-olds. Her own children were grown now, living in cities far from this small town, but every September brought her 22 new children who needed her attention, her patience, her care. She took that responsibility seriously. Perhaps too seriously, her husband sometimes suggested when she'd spend evenings worrying about a particular student. But Rachel knew better. She knew that sometimes a teacher was the only adult who noticed when something was wrong. Emily Harrison had been in her class since the school year started in late August. The girl was quiet. Almost painfully so, the kind of child who never raised her hand even when she clearly knew the answer. She completed her work neatly, kept her desk organized, and played alone during recess, usually sitting on a swing and watching the other children rather than joining their games. Rachel had noted this in her early observations, had mentioned it to the school counselor, but the consensus was that Emily was simply shy. Some children needed more time to come out of their shells. Her academic work was fine, her attendance perfect, and nothing suggested any immediate concern. But on a Tuesday morning in mid-September, Rachel noticed something shift. The children were settling into their seats for morning announcements when she realized Emily was still standing beside her desk. The little girl's hands gripped the edge of the desktop, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed downward. "Emily, honey, please take your seat," Rachel said gently, moving down the aisle between desks. Emily flinched at the words but didn't move. Her whole body tensed, shoulders drawing up toward her ears. "Emily?" Rachel knelt beside the desk, bringing herself to the child's eye level. Are you feeling all right? The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. I want to stand, she whispered. Rachel glanced at the clock. Morning announcements would start any moment, and the principal's voice over the intercom system was already crackling to life. Okay, sweetheart, you can stand for now, but we'll need to talk about this later. Emily nodded quickly, relief washing over her small features. Rachel straightened, returned to the front of the classroom, and led her students through the Pledge of Allegiance, while Emily stood at attention by her desk, one small figure upright while 21 others sat. A few children twisted in their seats to stare, but a gentle shake of Rachel's head silenced any questions. The day proceeded with Emily standing through every lesson. During silent reading time, she stood beside her desk with her book open. During math, she stood and worked on her worksheet balanced on the desktop. During art, she stood at the craft table while the other children sat on stools. Rachel watched all of this with growing concern, but she didn't press the issue. Sometimes children needed space to work through whatever was troubling them. Sometimes pushing too hard too fast only made things worse. At lunch, Rachel observed from her position monitoring the cafeteria. Emily carried her tray to a table in the corner, then stood beside it, eating her sandwich in small, mechanical bites. She didn't sit. She didn't even attempt to sit. When another teacher approached and tried to guide her to the bench, Emily's whole body went rigid, and she shook her head so violently that her braids whipped side to side. During afternoon recess, Rachel positioned herself near the swing set, where Emily usually spent her free time. But today, Emily didn't approach the swings. Instead, she stood at the edge of the playground, arms wrapped around herself, watching the other children with an expression that seemed far too old for her 6 years. Rachel started toward her, but the bell rang, signaling the end of recess, and the moment was lost in the chaos of children running back toward the building. That afternoon, Rachel pulled Emily aside as the other students packed their backpacks and prepared for dismissal. Emily, can we talk for just a minute? The little girl's eyes went wide with something that looked like fear. I have to catch my bus. I know, sweetheart. This will only take a second. Rachel guided her to the reading corner, a cozy space with beanbags and bookshelves that usually felt safe and comfortable. I noticed you didn't sit down at all today. Is something wrong? Are you hurt? Emily shook her head quickly, too quickly. No, Miss Carter, I'm fine. You can tell me if something's bothering you. That's what I'm here for. I just like standing. Emily's voice was barely audible. Can I go now? I'll miss my bus. Rachel studied the child's face, searching for clues. Emily's eyes wouldn't meet hers. The girl's hands twisted together, fingers nodding and unnodding in a nervous pattern. Everything about her body language screamed distress, but Rachel had no concrete reason to hold her, no clear evidence of anything wrong. All right. But Emily, I want you to know that you can always talk to me about anything, okay? Emily nodded and fled the classroom, her small feet carrying her quickly down the hallway toward the buses lined up outside. Rachel watched her go, that uneasy feeling settling deeper in her chest. The pattern continued the next day, and the day after that. Emily arrived each morning, hung up her coat, placed her backpack in her cubby, and then stood beside her desk for the entire school day. She stood during lessons, during lunch, during recess. She stood until dismissal, when she would hurry to catch her bus, always glancing back over her shoulder as if afraid someone might stop her. The other children had stopped staring, had accepted this as simply another one of Emily's quirks, the way she was quiet or played alone, but Rachel couldn't accept it, couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a quirk at all, but a signal, a flare shot up by a child who didn't have words for what was happening to her. On Thursday afternoon, Rachel requested a meeting with Janet Williams, the school counselor. Janet was younger than Rachel, in her early 30s, with an earnest manner and a master's degree in child psychology that she referenced frequently. They met in Janet's small office, a space decorated with cheerful posters about feelings and friendship. "I'm worried about Emily Harrison," Rachel began, settling into one of the child-sized chairs across from Janet's desk. Janet pulled up Emily's file on her computer, scanning the information. "The second grader? I remember you mentioning her at the beginning of the year. Shy, keeps to herself? It's more than that now. She hasn't sat down in 4 days. Not once. Not in her seat. Not at lunch. Not during recess. She just stands all day long." Janet's eyebrows rose. "That's unusual. Has she given any explanation?" "She says she wants to stand, says she likes it. But Janet, you should see her. She's terrified when anyone suggests she sit down. Yesterday I saw her start to cry when the art teacher tried to get her to sit on a stool. She won't make eye contact. Something is very wrong." Janet made notes on her computer, her expression thoughtful. "Could be anxiety-related. Some children develop rituals or compulsions as coping mechanisms, or it could be sensory issues, though those usually present earlier. Have you contacted the parents?" Rachel shook her head. "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. See if maybe you could try speaking with her, see if she'll open up to someone else." "Of course. I'll call her down tomorrow morning, see what I can find out." Janet clicked a few more keys, adding Emily to her schedule. "Try not to worry too much, Rachel. Kids go through phases. It might be nothing." But Rachel's instincts told her it wasn't nothing. 22 years of teaching had honed her ability to distinguish between normal childhood behavior and signs of something darker. This felt dark. The next morning, Emily was called to the counselor's office during reading time. Rachel watched the little girl's face drain of color when the announcement came over the intercom. Emily stood frozen beside her desk, her hands trembling. "It's okay, sweetheart," Rachel said gently. "Mrs. Williams just wants to chat with you for a bit." Emily walked to the door as if heading to her execution, each step slow and reluctant. Rachel wanted to follow, to be there with her, but she had 21 other students who needed her attention. She forced herself to continue the lesson, reading aloud from Charlotte's Web while part of her mind remained with Emily, wondering what was happening in that small office down the hall. 30 minutes later, Emily returned. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks blotchy. She went straight to her desk and stood beside it, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Rachel gave her space, finished the chapter, then set the students to independent work before approaching Emily's desk. "How did it go with Mrs. Williams?" she asked softly. Emily's chin trembled. "Fine. Did you talk about why you don't want to sit?" The little girl's whole body tensed. "I have to do my work now." Rachel retreated, recognizing that pushing would only cause more distress. At lunch, she found Janet in the teacher's lounge. "Well," Rachel asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. Janet's expression was troubled. "She wouldn't talk to me. I tried everything. Play therapy, drawing, simple conversation. She answered in one-word responses and spent most of the session on the verge of tears. When I suggested she sit down, she had what I can only describe as a panic attack. Started hyperventilating, crying, begging me not to make her sit." Rachel's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. "A panic attack? Janet, that's not normal." "No, it's not. I think we need to loop in the parents, get some background. There might be something medical going on, or trauma we're not aware of. I'll call them this afternoon." But when Janet called the Harrison household that afternoon, she reached only voicemail. She left a message asking Mrs. Harrison to call back regarding Emily. The call was never returned. Over the weekend, Rachel couldn't stop thinking about Emily. She found herself distracted during grocery shopping, during dinner with her husband, during her usual Saturday morning walk. The image of that small girl standing hour after hour, day after day, refusing to sit, haunted her. On Sunday evening, she pulled out her laptop and began researching, typing variations of child refuses to sit and standing all day symptoms into search engines. Most of what she found related to autism spectrum disorders or oppositional defiant disorder, neither of which fit Emily's presentation. But buried in a forum for teachers, she found a post that made her blood run cold. A teacher describing a similar situation, a child who wouldn't sit, who became hysterical at the suggestion. In that case, the child had been suffering physical abuse at home. The refusal to sit had been because sitting caused pain from injuries the child was too afraid to report. Rachel stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Could that be it? Could Emily be hurt? The thought made her feel physically sick. She thought of Emily's careful, controlled movements, the way she held herself so rigidly, the fear in her eyes. Oh, God! What if someone was hurting her? On Monday morning, Rachel arrived at school an hour early. She went straight to the principal's office, where she found Dennis Hoffman already at his desk, reviewing budget reports. "Dennis, I need to talk to you about Emily Harrison." The principal looked up, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He was in his early 60s, a practical man who ran the school with efficiency, if not particular warmth. "The standing girl?" Janet mentioned it. "What about her?" Rachel closed the office door and sat down. "I think she might be being abused at home." Dennis's expression shifted from mild interest to sharp attention. "That's a serious allegation, Rachel. What evidence do you have? Her behavior, the refusing to sit, the panic when anyone tries to make her, the way she flinches, the fear in her eyes. I did some research, and it fits the pattern of a child who's been physically harmed and is trying to hide it." "Research?" Dennis removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Rachel, I appreciate your concern for your students. I know you care deeply. But we can't make accusations based on internet research and intuition. Has anyone actually seen any injuries, any bruises or marks?" "No, but has Emily disclosed any abuse?" "No, she won't talk about it at all. But Dennis, that's typical for abused children. They're terrified to tell." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Here's what we can do. Keep observing her. Document everything. Times, behaviors, anything unusual. Janet will keep trying to reach the parents. If we can get them in for a meeting, we'll assess the situation then. But Rachel, we have to be careful. If we call CPS without solid evidence and we're wrong, we could destroy this family's reputation in this town. We could open the school up to legal action. I need more than a feeling." Rachel wanted to argue, wanted to insist they act now, but she understood his position. In a small town, accusations of abuse could devastate a family, even if they proved unfounded. And she didn't have proof. Not yet. "All right, I'll document everything. But Dennis, if I'm right, every day we wait is another day that child suffers. I know. Believe me, I know. But we have to do this right." Rachel left his office feeling frustrated and helpless. She returned to her classroom and began preparing for the day. But her mind was already cataloging everything she knew about Emily, everything she'd observed, building a case she hoped she'd never need to make. When Emily arrived that morning, Rachel watched her with new eyes, looking for any visible signs of injury. But Emily wore long sleeves despite the warm September day, and her uniform skirt fell below her knees. If there were marks, they were hidden. The little girl took her position beside her desk, and another day of standing began. During morning lessons, Rachel noticed Emily swaying slightly, her eyes drooping. The child was exhausted. Of course she was. Standing all day was physically demanding even for an adult. For a 6-year-old, it must be torture. But still she stood, choosing exhaustion over sitting, which told Rachel everything she needed to know about how much pain sitting must cause. At recess, Rachel positioned herself near Emily again. The little girl stood at the edge of the playground, watching the other children on the jungle gym. Rachel approached slowly, non-threateningly. "Emily, honey, don't you want to play?" Emily shook her head. "Not even on the swings. I know you used to like the swings. I can't." The words were barely audible. "Why can't you, sweetheart?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Because I just can't, okay? Please stop asking me questions." Rachel knelt down, bringing herself to Emily's level. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to upset you. I just worry about you. I care about you." A single tear rolled down Emily's cheek. "Nobody cares." The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. "That's not true, Emily." "I care. Mrs. Williams cares. All your teachers care." But Emily was shaking her head, more tears falling now. "You don't understand. Nobody understands." "Then help me understand. Talk to me. Tell me what's wrong." For a moment, Rachel thought she might break through. Emily's mouth opened, words seeming to form, but then the bell rang, signaling the end of recess, and the moment shattered. Emily turned and walked toward the building, wiping her tears with her sleeve, and Rachel was left kneeling on the playground with a terrible certainty growing in her chest. That afternoon, she began her documentation. She opened a fresh notebook and started writing down everything: dates, times, observations, conversations. She described Emily's behavior in detail, noted the panic attacks, the exhaustion, the tears, the refusal to sit under any circumstances. She wrote about the unanswered phone calls to the parents, the lack of any reasonable explanation for the behavior. She wrote until her hand cramped, creating a record that might someday be the difference between a child being saved or being lost. The week continued with agonizing slowness. Emily stood every day, growing more tired, more withdrawn. She stopped eating lunch, just stood beside her tray, pushing food around with her fork. She stopped attempting to participate in class, just stood silently while lessons happened around her. The other children had begun to ignore her completely, as if she'd become part of the furniture, another fixture in room 207. On Thursday, Janet finally reached Mrs. Harrison by phone. The conversation was brief and, according to Janet, unrevealing. "She said Emily's always been dramatic," Janet reported to Rachel after school. "Said she's probably doing it for attention, and we should just ignore it. She'll get bored and stop. That's it? That's her explanation." Rachel felt anger rising in her chest. She refused to come in for a meeting, said she works full-time and can't take off. I pushed, but she got defensive and hung up on me. What about the father? According to the file, he's not in the picture, left when Emily was a baby. It's just Emily and her mother, Linda Harrison. Rachel paced Janet's small office. This doesn't feel right. What kind of mother doesn't want to know why her 6-year-old won't sit down? "A mother who already knows," Janet said quietly. The two women looked at each other, the unspoken truth hanging between them. If Mrs. Harrison already knew why Emily wouldn't sit, it meant she was either the cause or complicit in whatever was happening. "We need to call CPS," Rachel said. "With what? A child who won't sit and a mother who won't come to school?" "Rachel, I agree something feels wrong, but Dennis is right. We need something concrete. So we just keep watching her suffer." Janet's expression was pained. "For now, yes. But keep documenting everything. Sooner or later, she'll either tell us what's wrong or give us something we can act on." Friday morning brought a development that changed everything. Emily arrived at school walking with a pronounced limp, her face pale and drawn. Rachel's heart sank as she watched the little girl make her way to her desk, each step careful and pained. When Emily reached her desk, She gripped the edge so tightly her knuckles turned white, and for the first time in 2 weeks, she looked like she might actually collapse. Rachel moved quickly down the aisle. "Emily, are you hurt?" The little girl's eyes were glassy, unfocused. "I'm okay. You're limping, sweetheart. Did you hurt your leg?" "I fell." The words came out automatically, rehearsed. "When did you fall?" "Last night on the stairs." Rachel's internal alarm bells rang louder, fell on the stairs. It was one of the most common lies abused children told, a convenient explanation for injuries that could have been sustained in any number of ways. "Did you tell your mom? Did she take you to the doctor?" Emily shook her head, swaying slightly on her feet. She said, "I'm fine. Just bruised." "Can I see where you're bruised?" Panic flashed across Emily's face. "No, I mean, it's okay. It doesn't hurt that much." But it clearly did hurt. Throughout the morning, Emily's condition deteriorated. She couldn't stand still anymore, shifting her weight constantly from foot to foot, small whimpers escaping despite her obvious efforts to stay silent. During reading time, she slumped against her desk, barely able to hold herself upright. Rachel knelt beside her again. "Emily, honey, I really think you need to see the nurse." "No!" The word came out sharp, desperate. "Please, Miss Carter, I'm fine. Don't make me go to the nurse." "Why don't you want to see the nurse?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Because then she'll call my mom and I'll be in trouble. Please, I promise I'm okay." There it was. The admission that being hurt would result in trouble at home. Rachel felt her stomach twist. "You won't be in trouble, sweetheart. If you're hurt, it's not your fault." But Emily was shaking her head frantically, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You don't understand. You don't know. Please just let me stay here. Please." Rachel looked into those terrified eyes and made a decision that would haunt her later. She let Emily stay in the classroom. She told herself she was building trust, giving Emily space to eventually open up. But the truth was she didn't know what else to do. She couldn't physically force the child to the nurse's office. She couldn't examine her without permission. All she could do was watch and wait, and hope Emily would finally tell her what was happening. But by lunchtime, Emily could barely stand. She made it to the cafeteria, but couldn't even pretend to eat. She stood beside her tray, tears streaming silently down her face, her whole body trembling. Rachel abandoned her monitoring duties and went to her. "That's it. We're going to the nurse." "Come on, sweetheart." Emily tried to protest, but she was too exhausted, too hurt. She let Rachel guide her down the hallway toward the nurse's office, each step a visible struggle. Halfway there, her legs gave out. Rachel caught her before she hit the floor, scooping the tiny girl into her arms. Emily was frighteningly light, all sharp angles and fragile bones. In the nurse's office, Rachel gently set Emily down on the examination table. The school nurse, Patricia Morrison, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd seen everything in her 30 years of school nursing. "What's going on?" Patricia asked, moving toward Emily with practiced efficiency. "She's been refusing to sit for 2 weeks, and today she came in limping. She says she fell on the stairs last night," Rachel explained. Patricia's experienced eyes scanned Emily's small form. "Emily, honey, can you tell me where it hurts?" Emily's face crumpled. "Everywhere," she whispered. "It hurts everywhere." "Can I take a look? I promise I'll be gentle." Emily nodded miserably, fresh tears falling. Patricia began a careful examination, checking Emily's arms, her legs, gently pressing areas to assess for injury. When her hands moved toward Emily's back and lower body, the little girl cried out. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm almost done," Patricia murmured. She looked at Rachel, her expression grave. "Rachel, can you step outside for a moment?" Rachel didn't want to leave, but she understood the need for privacy during a medical examination. She stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind her. Through the small window, she could see Patricia continuing her examination, could see Emily crying harder. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes, Patricia opened the door. "We need to call her mother," Patricia said quietly. "There's significant bruising on her lower back and thighs. Some of it looks old, some new. She needs to be seen by a doctor." "The mother won't come. We've tried calling multiple times. She's defensive and dismissive." Patricia's jaw tightened. "Then we need to call CPS. Rachel, this looks like abuse. I can't prove it, and Emily won't say how she really got these injuries. But in my professional opinion, these bruises are not consistent with a fall downstairs." Rachel felt vindication and horror in equal measure. She'd been right. Emily was being hurt. But being right meant a child she cared about had been suffering for who knows how long. "I'll call Dennis. He'll know what to do." Within the hour, room 207 was a hub of quiet activity. Dennis had arrived, had looked at Emily's injuries himself, and had made the call to Child Protective Services. A social worker was on her way. Emily sat in the nurse's office, wrapped in a blanket, still crying softly. Rachel sat with her, holding her hand, murmuring reassurances that felt hollow. What reassurance could she offer? That adults were finally paying attention, that help was coming. How could any of that undo what had already been done? The social worker arrived just after 1 o'clock. Her name was Andrea Chen, a young woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that seemed designed to put frightened children at ease. She spoke with Dennis and Patricia first, reviewing the documentation, examining Emily's injuries. Then she sat with Emily, asking gentle questions that Emily mostly couldn't or wouldn't answer. "Emily, I need you to be very brave and tell me the truth," Andrea said, crouching beside the examination table where Emily sat, hunched and small. "How did you get these bruises?" "I fell," Emily whispered, staring at her lap. "Are you sure? Because some of these bruises are different ages. That means they happened at different times. Did you fall more than once?" Emily nodded mutely. "Where do you fall? At home? At school?" "At home." "On the stairs." Andrea glanced at Patricia, who shook her head slightly. The stairs explanation didn't match the injury pattern. "Emily, has anyone ever hurt you on purpose? Your mom? Or anyone else?" Emily's whole body went rigid. "No, I fell. I'm clumsy. My mom says I'm always falling." "Does your mom ever get angry with you?" Silence. "Does she ever hit you?" "No." But the word was too quick, too automatic. Andrea tried several more approaches, but Emily had shut down completely. She wouldn't make eye contact, wouldn't engage. Finally, Andrea made the decision to take Emily to the hospital for a full examination. She explained that doctors would need to check all her injuries, make sure nothing was seriously wrong. Emily accepted this with the resigned look of a child who'd learned there was no point in fighting. Rachel watched from the nurse's office doorway as Andrea led Emily down the hallway toward the exit. The little girl looked back once, her eyes finding Rachel's, and in that look was a plea Rachel couldn't quite interpret. Don't let them take me? Don't tell them? Or maybe just, help me. This is the right thing, Dennis said quietly beside her. You did good, Rachel. You paid attention when no one else did. But Rachel didn't feel good. She felt sick. She felt like she'd failed Emily by not acting sooner, by letting 2 weeks pass while a child suffered. I should have called CPS the first day. I should have trusted my instincts. You followed protocol. You documented. You observed. You involved the appropriate people. You did everything right. But doing everything right hadn't stopped Emily from being hurt. Hadn't stopped whatever was happening to her at home from continuing for 2 more weeks while Rachel gathered evidence and followed procedures. The bitter taste of that reality stayed with Rachel for the rest of the day. That evening, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, unable to eat the dinner her husband had prepared. David watched her with concern, this man who'd been married to her for 28 years, and knew her every mood. "You can't save them all, Rach," he said gently. "I know, but I should have saved this one. I knew something was wrong. I felt it from the first day. And you acted on it. You did what you could within the system. The system is too slow, too cautious. While we're gathering evidence and making phone calls, children are being hurt." David reached across the table and took her hand. "What's the alternative? Removing children from homes on suspicion alone? You know that's not better. The system has to be careful, has to be sure." Rachel knew he was right intellectually, but emotionally she couldn't accept it. Somewhere tonight, Emily was either in a hospital being examined by strangers, or worse, back home with whoever had given her those bruises. The thought made Rachel's chest ache. The weekend passed with agonizing slowness. Rachel thought about calling Andrea for an update, but knew she wouldn't get any information due to confidentiality rules. She thought about driving past Emily's house, but recognized that would cross professional boundaries. Instead, she spent Saturday cleaning her house with furious energy, and Sunday at church barely hearing the sermon, her mind replaying every interaction with Emily, searching for signs she'd missed. On Monday morning, Rachel arrived at school early again, hoping for news. She found Dennis in his office, looking exhausted. "What happened?" she asked. "CPS investigated over the weekend. They interviewed Emily at the hospital, examined all her injuries. The doctors confirmed the bruising was inconsistent with falls. Some of the injuries showed signs of being inflicted by an object, possibly a belt or switch. They interviewed the mother, Linda Harrison." Rachel's heart pounded. "And?" She denied everything. Said Emily is accident-prone, clumsy, always hurting herself. She was angry about the investigation, threatened to sue the school for making false accusations. CPS couldn't find enough evidence to remove Emily immediately, so they've opened a case for monitoring. Emily went home with her mother. She went home? Rachel felt the room spin slightly. Dennis, they sent her back to the person who's hurting her. Without a clear disclosure from Emily or evidence of immediate danger, they couldn't justify removal. The mother agreed to parenting classes and home visits. Emily will be monitored closely. That's not enough. You know that's not enough. Dennis's expression was grim. I know, but it's all we can do right now. Emily will be back in school today. Keep watching her, keep documenting. If anything else happens, we'll be ready. But would they? Rachel had been watching, had been documenting, and it hadn't been enough to protect Emily from going back into a dangerous situation. The system had failed. They had all failed. When Emily walked into room 207 that morning, Rachel had to fight to keep her expression neutral. The little girl looked worse than before, if that was possible. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her movements were even more careful, more controlled. And she was still standing, still refusing to approach her chair. Rachel wanted to rush to her, to gather her up and promise everything would be okay, but she maintained her professional distance. Good morning, Emily. I'm glad you're back. Emily didn't respond, just took her position beside her desk and stared at the floor. The other children had noticed the social worker visit on Friday, had heard whispers from adults, and now they stared at Emily with new interest. Rachel had to redirect their attention multiple times during morning lessons. At recess, Rachel tried to approach Emily again, but the little girl turned away from her, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. Emily, I know you're angry with me, Rachel said softly. I know you think I got you in trouble, but I promise I was trying to help. You made it worse, Emily whispered, her voice thick with tears. She's so mad at me now. You made it so much worse. The words were like a knife to Rachel's heart. Emily, sweetheart, what your mother is doing isn't your fault. You didn't deserve to be hurt. You don't know anything, Emily's voice broke. You don't know what she's like when she's really mad, and now she's really, really mad. Rachel felt panic rising in her chest. Emily, If your mom hurt you again, you need to tell someone. Tell me, or tell Mrs. Chen, the social worker. We can help you." But Emily was already walking away, putting distance between herself and Rachel, retreating into whatever survival mechanism she'd developed for dealing with her situation. Rachel let her go, watching helplessly as the little girl stood alone at the edge of the playground, a small figure bearing a burden no child should carry. The week that followed was the longest of Rachel's teaching career. Emily came to school each day and stood beside her desk in silence. She stopped participating entirely, stopped doing any work, stopped engaging with anyone. She became a ghost in the classroom, present physically but absent in every other way. Rachel documented everything, noting times Emily cried silently, times she flinched when someone approached, times she seemed to dissociate completely. But none of it seemed enough to trigger another intervention. Rachel called Andrea Chen twice, leaving voicemails that weren't returned. She emailed updates to Dennis daily. She spoke with Janet about trying another counseling session, but Emily had retreated so far into herself that reaching her seemed impossible. On Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after the CPS investigation, Emily didn't show up for school. Rachel checked the absence list, saw Emily's name, felt her stomach drop. She immediately went to Dennis's office. "Emily's absent. Did the mother call in?" Dennis checked his records. "No call. Want me to reach out?" "Yes, please. Something doesn't feel right." Dennis called Emily's home number. No answer. He tried Mrs. Harrison's cell phone, straight to voicemail. He left a message asking about Emily's absence and requesting a return call. The call was never returned. Friday, Emily was absent again. Still no communication from the mother. Dennis called CPS, reported the absences, was told they'd look into it. Rachel spent the day in a state of barely controlled panic, imagining worst-case scenarios, unable to focus on teaching. That evening, she broke her own rule and drove past Emily's house. It was a small rental on the poor side of town, paint peeling, yard overgrown. A single light burned in a front window, but there was no sign of activity. Rachel sat in her car across the street for 20 minutes, watching, hoping to see Emily, to confirm she was okay. But the house remained still and silent, and eventually Rachel drove home feeling like a stalker and a failure. Saturday morning, her phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Dennis. "Rachel, I just got a call from Andrea Chen. Emily's in the hospital. She collapsed at home last night." The mother called 911. Rachel's hand tightened on the phone. "Is she okay? What happened?" "They don't know yet. She's unconscious. They're running tests. It looks like she might have a serious infection, possibly from untreated injuries." "Rachel, this is bad. Really bad." Rachel got dressed in a daze, told her husband she was going to the hospital, and drove there on autopilot. She didn't know if they'd let her see Emily, didn't know what good she could possibly do, but she had to be there. She had to know. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and despair. Rachel found Andrea Chen there, the social worker looking as exhausted as Rachel felt. They sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs under harsh lighting, not speaking, just waiting. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably 45 minutes, a doctor emerged. "Are you here for Emily Harrison?" he asked. Andrea stood. "Yes, I'm her social worker. This is her teacher." The doctor was young, probably in his early 30s, with tired eyes that had seen too much. "Emily has a severe infection in her lower body, likely stemming from untreated wounds. She's septic, which means the infection has spread to her bloodstream. We've started aggressive antibiotic treatment, but the next 24 hours are critical." "Will she be okay?" Rachel's voice cracked on the words. "We're doing everything we can. She's stable for now, but sepsis is very serious, especially in a child her size. If she'd waited even one more day before getting medical attention, we might have lost her." Rachel felt the room tilt. Lost her. They might have lost Emily because no one had intervened strongly enough, quickly enough, because the system had sent her back to a home where she was being hurt, where wounds were being left untreated, where a 6-year-old had been suffering alone. "Can I see her?" Rachel asked. The doctor hesitated. "She's unconscious. She won't know you're there." "I need to see her, please." Something in Rachel's expression must have convinced him. He nodded. 5 minutes. She's in the pediatric ICU, room 312. Rachel followed the doctor through a maze of hallways, Andrea beside her. The pediatric ICU was quieter than the rest of the hospital, dimmed lights and hushed voices. Room 312 had a window that looked in on a scene Rachel would never forget. Emily lay in a bed that dwarfed her small body, connected to machines and monitors, IVs running into both arms. Her face was pale against the white pillows. Her eyes closed, her breathing supported by oxygen tubes. She looked impossibly small and fragile, like a doll arranged in a hospital bed. Rachel stood at that window and cried. Not the quiet, professional tears she'd shed in private, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere in her core. Andrea put a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. "I should have done more," Rachel said when she could speak again. "I should have called CPS the first day, should have pushed harder, should have refused to let her go home." "You did everything you could within the system," Andrea said. "Rachel, I need you to hear this. You saved her life. If you hadn't been paying attention, if you hadn't documented everything, if you hadn't pushed for that examination, Emily would have kept suffering in silence until an infection like this killed her. You're the reason we knew something was wrong. You're the reason she's getting help now." "But I wasn't enough. She still went home. She still got hurt, worse. Because the system is flawed. Because we need clear evidence before we can remove children, and sometimes that evidence comes too late. But Rachel, you did your job. More than your job. You cared enough to look past the easy explanations and see a child in distress. Most people wouldn't have done that." Rachel wiped her eyes, staring at Emily through the glass. The machines beeped rhythmically, tracking heartbeat and oxygen levels, cold numbers representing a warm, precious life hanging in the balance. What happens now, after she recovers? She won't go back to her mother. We have enough now for emergency removal. The untreated wounds, the infection, the pattern of injuries. It's more than sufficient. Emily will go into foster care while we determine the best permanent placement. And her mother? That's up to the police. They're investigating for child abuse, possibly aggravated assault given the severity. If Emily pulls through and can eventually testify about what happened, the district attorney will likely press charges. If Emily pulls through. The words hung in the air, a reminder that this story might not have a happy ending. That despite everyone's best efforts, Emily might not survive. Rachel thought about that possibility, about a world without Emily's quiet presence, and felt her grief deepen into something physical, a weight pressing on her chest. She stood at that window for longer than 5 minutes. The doctor didn't come back to chase her away. She watched Emily breathe, watched the machines track every vital sign, and prayed to a God she wasn't sure was listening that this child would survive, that she'd get a chance at a life free from pain and fear, that somehow, impossibly, this would turn out okay. Finally, Andrea gently guided her away. "You should go home, Rachel. Get some rest. I'll call you if anything changes. Promise? I promise." Rachel drove home in a fog. She found David waiting for her, and she collapsed into his arms, letting him hold her while she cried until she had no tears left. He didn't tell her it would be okay, didn't offer empty platitudes. He just held her. And sometimes that was enough. The next day was Sunday, but Rachel couldn't face church. Instead, she sat on her couch, phone in hand, waiting for news. At 2 in the afternoon, Andrea called. "She's awake," Andrea said, and Rachel could hear the relief in her voice. Still very sick, but conscious. She asked for her mother first, then when I explained that wasn't possible, she asked for you. Rachel was already grabbing her keys. I'm on my way. The drive to the hospital felt eternal, every red light an obstacle, every slow driver a frustration. When she finally reached Emily's room, she paused at the door, suddenly uncertain. What could she possibly say to this child she'd failed to protect? But Emily saw her through the doorway and smiled. It was a weak smile, barely there, but it was real. Rachel moved to the bedside, taking Emily's small hand in hers, careful not to disturb the IV lines. Hi, sweetheart, Rachel said softly. How are you feeling? Tired, Emily whispered. Her voice was hoarse, probably from the breathing tube they'd had down her throat. And it still hurts. But the doctors say I'm going to be okay. You are going to be okay, I promise. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Miss Carter. I'm sorry I didn't tell you what was happening. I was just so scared. Rachel felt her own eyes burning. You have nothing to be sorry for, Emily. Nothing. You were so brave coming to school every day, trying to keep going even when you were hurting. You were the bravest person I know. I wanted to tell you. That day on the playground when you asked me what was wrong, I wanted to tell you everything. But I couldn't. Mama said if I told anyone what she did, they'd take me away and put me somewhere worse. She said foster care was full of mean people who hurt kids even worse than she did. She said nobody would believe me anyway because I was just a stupid, clumsy kid. Rachel's heart broke hearing those words, hearing the lies this child had been fed to keep her silent. Emily, your mama was wrong about all of that. Foster care isn't perfect, but there are good people who will take care of you. And I believed you. Even when you couldn't tell me, I believed something was wrong. I know. That's why I was so scared when the social worker came. I knew Mama would blame me. And she did. Emily's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That night after I came home from the hospital the first time, she was so angry. She said I was trying to ruin her life, that I was making her look like a bad mother. She said I deserved to be punished for telling lies about her. What did she do, Emily? Rachel asked gently, though part of her didn't want to know, couldn't bear to hear it. She used her belt, like always. But this time she didn't stop when I cried. She just kept hitting and hitting. On my back and my legs and other places. She said I needed to learn to keep my mouth shut. After, she locked me in my room and told me I couldn't go to school until the marks faded. She said if anyone saw them, they'd know I'd been bad, and everyone would hate me. Rachel squeezed Emily's hand gently, fighting to keep her voice steady. You weren't bad, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. What your mother did was wrong. Adults are never supposed to hurt children like that. Never. But I was bad sometimes. I spilled juice once and broke a plate another time, and I talked back when she told me to clean my room. Doesn't that mean I deserve to be punished? No. Children make mistakes. That's how you learn. But punishment should never, ever involve hurting someone. A time out, or losing a privilege, those are normal punishments. But hitting a child with a belt? Leaving wounds that get infected? That's not punishment, Emily. That's abuse. Emily processed this silently, her young mind trying to rewrite years of conditioning. Is that why I can't go home? Because it's abuse? Yes, the social workers and police are going to make sure you're safe now. You won't have to go back there. Fresh tears rolled down Emily's cheeks. I know I should be happy about that, but she's still my mama. I still love her, even though she hurt me. Does that make me stupid? Rachel's own tears fell freely now. No, sweetheart, that makes you human. You can love someone and still know they hurt you. You can wish things were different while accepting they can't be. Those feelings are all okay. Where will I go? if I can't go home? Somewhere safe. Andrea will find you a good foster family, people who will take care of you the right way, and I'll still be your teacher. When you're well enough to come back to school, you'll still be in my class. I'll still see you every day. Emily's grip on Rachel's hand tightened. Promise? You promise you won't forget about me? I could never forget about you, Emily Harrison. Never. They sat together in silence for a while, Rachel stroking Emily's hair while the little girl dozed off. The antibiotics were working, the doctor said when he came by. The infection was responding to treatment. Emily would need to stay in the hospital for at least another week, maybe 2, but she was going to survive. She was going to be okay. Over the next week, Rachel visited Emily every day after school. She brought books and read aloud, brought coloring supplies, and sat beside Emily while she drew pictures of flowers and rainbows and houses with happy families inside. She brought updates about the classroom, about the other students, about the caterpillars they were raising that would soon become butterflies. She brought normalcy and care and consistent presence, showing Emily that adults could be trusted, that the world held kindness as well as cruelty. Andrea visited often, too, sometimes with potential foster families for Emily to meet. The first family was an older couple who seemed nice but formal. Emily was polite but didn't warm to them. The second family had 3 other foster children already and seemed overwhelmed. The third family was David and Susan Martinez, a couple in their 40s with 2 teenage daughters. They brought Emily a stuffed unicorn and talked to her about their home, about the bedroom she would have, about their dog named Chester who loved everyone. Emily smiled for the first time since waking up when they showed her pictures of Chester. I've never had a dog, Emily said quietly. Well, Chester's been waiting for someone to play with, Susan said. Our daughters are too old to play fetch anymore. He needs someone young and energetic. I'm not very energetic, Emily admitted. I get tired a lot. That's okay. Chester gets tired a lot, too. You can be tired together. Rachel watched this interaction and felt hope blooming in her chest. This family felt right. They were warm without being overwhelming, patient without being condescending. They looked at Emily and saw a child, not a problem to be fixed. 2 weeks after Emily's collapse, she was discharged from the hospital into the temporary custody of the Martinez family. Rachel helped pack up the cards and drawings and stuffed animals that had accumulated in Emily's room, helped carry them to the Martinez's car, hugged Emily goodbye with promises to see her soon. I'm scared, Emily whispered into Rachel's shoulder. I know, but you're also brave. You've been brave through so much worse than this. You can be brave through this too. What if they change their minds? What if they don't really want me? They want you, sweetheart. I can see it in how they look at you. Give them a chance. Give yourself a chance. Emily nodded against Rachel's shoulder, then pulled back and got into the car. Rachel waved as they drove away, Emily's small face pressed to the window, hand raised in farewell. The following Monday, Rachel stood in front of her classroom and addressed her students. As you all know, Emily's been absent for several weeks. I want to tell you that she's okay. She was very sick, but she's better now. She's staying with a new family for a while, and when she's strong enough, she'll come back to school. Until then, we're going to keep learning and growing, and we're going to be ready to welcome her back with kindness. One student raised her hand. Why is Emily with a new family? What about her mom? Rachel chose her words carefully. Sometimes families have problems that grown-ups need to help fix. Emily's mom wasn't able to take care of her the right way, so Emily is staying with people who can. It's complicated, and it's private, so we're not going to gossip about it. We're just going to be good friends and classmates when she comes back. Okay? The children nodded, accepting this explanation with the flexibility of youth. They moved on to math lessons, to reading groups, to art projects. Life in room 207 continued, but with an empty desk that served as a reminder of how fragile childhood could be, how much children depended on adults to keep them safe. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in early November, Emily walked back into room 207. She moved carefully, still healing, still rebuilding her strength. But she walked in with her head up, holding Susan Martinez's hand. The other students looked up, and for a moment the classroom was silent. Then one child started clapping, and another joined in, and soon the whole class was applauding Emily's return. Emily's face flushed, embarrassed and pleased. She made her way to her desk, to her chair, and this time she sat down. She sat down without fear, without pain, without trauma. She pulled out her pencil and notebook and looked up at Rachel with a smile that said more than words ever could. Rachel had to turn away for a moment, blinking back tears. When she'd composed herself, she started the day's lesson, watching Emily participate for the first time in months. The little girl raised her hand to answer questions, worked on assignments with focus, talked quietly with the student beside her. She looked like any other second grader, learning and growing and being a child. At recess, Rachel watched Emily join a group of girls on the swings. She swung high, laughing, and Rachel thought about how far they'd come from that terrified little girl who couldn't sit down. The healing wasn't complete. Emily still flinched sometimes at sudden movements, still had nightmares that left her exhausted the next day, according to Susan. But she was healing. She was safe. She was going to be okay. The legal proceedings moved forward through November and December. Linda Harrison was arrested and charged with multiple counts of child abuse, aggravated assault, and child endangerment. The evidence was overwhelming. Medical records, photographs, Emily's testimony given carefully with victim advocates present. Rachel was called to testify about what she'd observed in the classroom, and she did so clearly and completely, laying out every documented incident, every concerning behavior, every sign she'd seen that something was wrong. The defense attorney tried to paint Emily as a difficult child, tried to suggest Linda had been overwhelmed and made mistakes rather than deliberately abusing her daughter. But the jury saw through it. In January, Linda Harrison was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Emily wouldn't have to see her mother again until she was an adult, until she was strong enough and healed enough to make that choice for herself. The Martinez family petitioned to adopt Emily in February. The process would take time, background checks and home studies and court appearances. But everyone involved knew it was the right placement. Emily thrived with them. She put on healthy weight, her nightmares decreased, her smile came more easily. She called Susan, Mama Susan, and talked about her big sisters with pride. Chester the dog slept in her room every night, a warm presence that chased away bad dreams. On a warm day in late March, Rachel received an invitation in the mail. It was hand-drawn, decorated with careful crayons and stickers. "You are invited to my adoption party," it read in Emily's improving handwriting. "I'm getting a forever family. Please come celebrate with me. Love, Emily Martinez." Emily Martinez. She'd already taken their name in her heart, even before the law made it official. Rachel smiled and put the invitation on her refrigerator, where she could see it every day. The adoption party was held in the Martinez's backyard on a Saturday in April. The sun shone bright, warming winter-weary faces. Children ran through the grass while adults chatted and ate cake. Emily wore a new dress, purple with butterflies on it, and she glowed with happiness. When she saw Rachel arrive, she ran to her and threw her arms around her waist. "You came?" "Of course I came. I wouldn't miss this for anything." Emily pulled back, looking up at Rachel with eyes that had regained their light. "I wanted to say thank you for not giving up on me, for seeing that something was wrong even when I couldn't tell you. You saved my life, Miss Carter." Rachel knelt down, bringing herself to Emily's level one more time. You saved your own life, Emily, by being brave enough to keep going, even when everything hurt. I just paid attention. That's what teachers are supposed to do. Will you still be my teacher next year? If you want me to be. 3rd grade is down the hall, but I think I could pull some strings and request you in my class again. Emily hugged her again, tight and fierce. I want that. I want you to be my teacher forever. Rachel laughed, returning the hug. Maybe not forever, but for as long as you need me. As the party continued around them, Rachel found herself talking with Susan and David Martinez. They sat at a picnic table while Emily played with Chester and her new sisters in the yard. She still has hard days, Susan confided. Days when the trauma catches up with her and she shuts down. Days when she has accidents because she's too scared to ask to use the bathroom. Days when she flinches if I move too fast or speak too loud. But she's healing, David added. Every week she's a little more confident, a little more willing to trust. Our therapist says she's making remarkable progress, considering what she went through. Rachel nodded, watching Emily laugh as Chester licked her face. She's a remarkable kid, strong in ways most people never have to be. We wanted to thank you, Susan said. Andrea told us you were the one who kept pushing, who refused to let Emily's situation be ignored. Most teachers would have assumed she was just being difficult. You saw past that. I almost didn't, Rachel admitted. There were days I doubted myself, days I thought maybe everyone else was right and I was overreacting. If I'd stopped pushing, if I'd accepted the easy explanations. But you didn't, David said firmly. You trusted your instincts, and because of that, Emily is here with us instead of... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The 3 adults sat in silence for a moment, contemplating the alternate timeline where Rachel had given up, where Emily had continued suffering until the infection killed her, or something else broke her completely. It was a dark timeline, one that, thankfully, remained hypothetical. What happened to her mother? Rachel asked. I testified at the trial, but I haven't followed the case since then. 15 years in prison, Susan said. She'll be eligible for parole in 10, but given the severity of the abuse and her lack of remorse, the parole board is unlikely to grant it. Emily won't have to see her again unless she chooses to as an adult. Does she want to? See her mother, I mean? Susan shook her head. Not yet. Maybe someday when she's older and has processed everything. The therapist says it's normal for abused children to still love their abusers, to miss them even while understanding what they did was wrong. Emily talks about her mother sometimes, but always in the past tense. My old mom used to, like that part of her life is finished. In a way, it is, Rachel said. She's Emily Martinez now. New name, new family, new life. The old life is something she survived, not something that defines her. They watched Emily for a while longer, this resilient child who'd endured so much and come through it with her spirit intact. She was teaching her new sisters a clapping game, her voice bright with laughter. Looking at her now, no one would guess what she'd been through. The scars were there, physical and emotional, but they were healing. They were becoming part of her story rather than the whole story. As the party wound down and guests began leaving, Rachel hugged Emily one more time. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. So very proud. I'm proud of me too, Emily said with a shy smile. That's what my therapist says I should be. Proud that I survived. Your therapist is very smart. She is. And she says that what happened to me wasn't my fault, and that I deserve to be protected, and that it's okay to be happy now even though sad things happened before. Rachel's throat tightened. All of that is true. I know. I'm learning to believe it. Rachel drove home that evening feeling lighter than she had in months. The guilt she'd carried about not acting sooner, about following protocols while a child suffered, had eased. Not disappeared. She suspected that would always be there, a reminder to trust her instincts faster next time. But it had eased enough that she could breathe again, could celebrate the fact that Emily was safe and loved and healing. The school year continued, spring giving way to the final weeks before summer break. Emily remained in Rachel's class, thriving academically and socially. She made friends, joined the school choir, brought home artwork to hang on the Martinez's refrigerator. She became just another student in room 207, which was exactly what she needed to be. On the last day of school, Rachel handed out report cards and memory books filled with photos and writings from throughout the year. Emily's book was thick with her work, stories she'd written, pictures she'd drawn, test scores that showed steady improvement. Rachel had added a special note on the last page. Emily, watching you grow this year has been one of the greatest honors of my teaching career. You are brave, strong, kind, and brilliant. Never forget how special you are. Love, Miss Carter. Emily read the note and cried happy tears, then threw her arms around Rachel in front of the whole class. The other students had learned by now that Emily was special to Miss Carter, and none of them minded. If anything, they seemed to understand that their teacher's fierce protectiveness of Emily extended to all of them. That room 207 was a safe place, where adults paid attention and children mattered. The summer passed peacefully for Emily. She went to day camp, learned to swim, took a family vacation to the beach where she collected shells and built sandcastles with her sisters. She grew taller, filled out, lost some of the haunted look that had shadowed her eyes. By the time school started again in August, she looked like a different child than the frightened 6-year-old who'd stood beside her desk, afraid to sit down. Rachel moved up to teaching 3rd grade that year, specifically so Emily could remain in her class. The administration had agreed readily, understanding the importance of continuity for a child who'd experienced so much upheaval. When Emily walked into room 207 on the first day of 3rd grade, she grinned at Rachel and went straight to her assigned seat. She sat down without hesitation, pulled out her supplies, and got ready to learn. Other students filtered in, taking their seats, chatting about their summers. Rachel took attendance, made her welcome speech, and began the year's first lesson. But part of her attention remained on Emily, on this child who'd survived so much and came to school each day ready to learn and grow. This child who'd taught Rachel that paying attention mattered, that trusting your instincts mattered, that one person caring could make all the difference. Years later, when Rachel thought back on her teaching career, she would remember many students fondly. But Emily would always hold a special place in her heart. Emily, who'd been brave enough to survive. Emily, who'd taught Rachel that sometimes the quietest children were screaming the loudest. Emily, who'd shown her that healing was possible, that resilience was real, that love could overcome even the darkest trauma. The story of the girl who wouldn't sit became something Rachel shared in professional development workshops, in conversations with new teachers, in training sessions about recognizing signs of abuse. She told it not to glorify herself, but to emphasize the importance of paying attention, of trusting your instincts even when it feels like you might be wrong, of advocating for children who can't advocate for themselves. Watch your students, she would tell new teachers. Really watch them. Notice when behavior changes, when a child who was engaged becomes withdrawn, when something feels off, even if you can't articulate why. Trust that feeling. Document what you see. Report your concerns. Don't wait for proof. On the side of protecting children. You might be wrong, but you might be right, and being right could save a life. She would tell them about Emily, about the standing, about the fear, about the injuries hidden beneath the school uniform. She would tell them about the guilt she still carried for not acting faster, and how she'd learned to channel that guilt into determination to do better next time. She would tell them that being a teacher wasn't just about math and reading. It was about being a safe adult in a child's life, someone who noticed and cared and acted. And she would end by telling them that Emily was thriving now, that she'd gone on to graduate from high school with honors, that she'd gone to college and was studying to become a teacher herself. That the little girl who'd once stood beside her desk afraid to sit down was now going to stand in front of her own classroom, watching her own students, paying attention the way Rachel had paid attention to her. "You can't save them all," Rachel would say, echoing what her husband had told her years ago. "But you can save the ones in front of you if you're brave enough to see them, really see them. That's our job. That's our calling. To be the adults who notice, who care, who act. Sometimes that means following protocols and documenting evidence. Sometimes that means making phone calls that might be uncomfortable. Sometimes that means standing in a hospital corridor crying because you wish you'd done more. But always, always, it means paying attention. Because the most dangerous thing we can do is look away." Rachel retired from teaching at 65 after 40 years in the classroom. Her retirement party was well attended by former students, parents, colleagues. And there, standing with her own teaching degree, newly earned, was Emily Martinez. Now Emily Chen, after marrying a wonderful man who'd seen past her scars to the strong woman she'd become. "You inspired me," Emily told Rachel, hugging her tight. "I want to be the kind of teacher you were. The kind who sees children, really sees them." "You'll be wonderful," Rachel said. "You already understand what matters most. That every child deserves to be safe, to be seen, to be valued. You learned that the hard way, but it made you who you are." Emily smiled, that brilliant smile that Rachel had fought so hard to help her reclaim. "I start my first teaching job in the fall, 2nd grade." "Of course, 2nd grade," Rachel laughed. "That's when the magic happens." "That's when you saved my life." "No, sweetheart. That's when we saved each other. You taught me to trust my instincts. You taught me that advocacy matters. You taught me what it really means to be a teacher." They stood together, two women bound by a shared history of trauma and healing, of suffering and survival. Of a little girl who wouldn't sit down and a teacher who wouldn't stop asking why. Around them, the party continued, celebrating Rachel's long career and the hundreds of students whose lives she'd touched. But in this moment, it was just the two of them, teacher and student, both understanding that what had happened in room 207 all those years ago had changed them both, forever. As Rachel drove home that evening, she thought about all the children she'd taught, all the lives she'd touched. Some students she remembered fondly but vaguely, their faces blurring together over decades. Others stood out clearly. The boy who'd struggled with reading until something clicked. The girl who'd lost her father and needed extra support. The child who'd been brilliant but bored until Rachel found ways to challenge him. But Emily would always be different. Emily would always be the child who'd reminded Rachel why she'd become a teacher in the first place. Not to teach math or reading or science, though those things mattered, but to be a safe adult in children's lives, to be someone who noticed when things weren't right, to be an advocate and protector and champion for those who couldn't protect themselves. The sun was setting as Rachel pulled into her driveway, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She sat in her car for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. 22 years old and idealistic, starting her first teaching job with dreams of making a difference. 53 years old and experienced, standing beside Emily's hospital bed, promising to never give up. 65 years old and retiring, watching Emily begin her own teaching career with hope and determination. She'd made mistakes along the way. She'd missed signs with some students, acted too slowly with others, let protocols and fear of being wrong prevent her from acting fast enough. But she'd also gotten it right sometimes. She'd been the adult who paid attention, who cared enough to push back against the system when necessary, who'd refused to accept easy explanations when her instincts told her something was wrong. That was enough. That had to be enough. You couldn't save them all, but you could save the ones in front of you. You could be present, aware, engaged. You could trust your instincts while still following appropriate procedures. You could be the teacher who noticed when a child wouldn't sit down, who asked questions when everyone else assumed misbehavior, who documented evidence and advocated for intervention even when it felt uncomfortable. Rachel got out of her car and walked into her house where David was making dinner and their grandchildren were visiting for the weekend. She hugged her husband, played with the grandchildren, and ate dinner surrounded by family. But part of her mind remained with Emily. With all the Emilys she'd taught over the years, the children who'd needed someone to notice them, to see past behavior to the hurt underneath. And she thought about all the teachers out there right now, in classrooms across the country, watching their students and wondering if they should trust their instincts about a particular child. She hoped they would. She hoped they'd be brave enough to ask questions, to document concerns, to call CPS even when they weren't entirely sure. Because sometimes being wrong was embarrassing, but being right could save a life. If this story has resonated with you, if you've learned something about the importance of paying attention to children, of trusting your instincts when something feels wrong, of being an advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share it with teachers, parents, counselors, anyone who works with children and needs to be reminded that noticing matters, that caring makes a difference. Leave a comment telling us what you think. Have you ever been in a situation where you noticed something wrong with a child? Did you act on it? What happened? Your stories and perspectives help build a community of awareness, a network of people committed to protecting children and creating safe spaces where they can thrive. And most importantly, if you're someone working with children right now, teacher, counselor, coach, youth leader, please pay attention. Really watch the kids in your care. Notice when behavior changes, when something feels off. When a child who was engaged becomes withdrawn, or a quiet child becomes silent. Trust your instincts. Document what you see. Report your concerns through appropriate channels. You might be wrong, and that's okay. But you might be right, and being right could save a life. Don't wait for perfect evidence. Don't let fear of being wrong paralyze you into inaction. Act. Advocate. Be the adult who notices, who cares, who refuses to look away when a child is suffering. Be the teacher Rachel was for Emily. Be the safe person a child desperately needs, because somewhere right now, there's a child standing beside their desk, afraid to sit down. There's a child hiding injuries beneath their uniform. There's a child suffering in silence, hoping someone will notice, will care enough to ask why. Be that someone. Be the person who sees what others miss. Be the voice for the voiceless. That's what Emily needed. That's what Rachel provided. And that's what countless other children need from the adults in their lives right now. Don't let them down. Pay attention. Trust your instincts. Act with courage and compassion. Save the child in front of you. Because every child deserves to be safe. Every child deserves to be seen. Every child deserves to sit down without fear, to go to school without pain, to live a childhood free from abuse and trauma. And sometimes the only thing standing between a suffering child and that safe, seen, pain-free existence is one adult who cares enough to notice and brave enough to act. Be that adult. Be the difference. Be what Emily needed Rachel to be, a teacher who wouldn't give up, who wouldn't look away, Who wouldn't stop asking questions until a child was safe? That's the lesson here. That's what matters. Not the specific details of Emily's story, but the universal truth it represents. That paying attention saves lives, that caring makes a difference, that one person acting with courage and compassion can change everything for a child in distress. Thank you for watching, for caring, for being the kind of person who would sit through this entire story because you understand that children matter, that their safety matters, that our collective responsibility to protect them matters. Together, we can create a world where no child has to stand beside their desk afraid to sit down, where abuse is noticed quickly and stopped decisively, where every child has at least one adult who sees them and cares enough to act. Be that adult. Please. The children are counting on us.